is the opportunity of our generation, but it is an existential threat. And to be an opportunity of our generation, it must be available to all countries of the world and to all areas of the world population. And it is possible to do it, but we need to have a global platform where everybody can come together. Artificial intelligence will be the central element of change in the world in the near future.
Hello everyone, and welcome to a special live stream coming to you from inside the United Nations headquarters during this 79th General Assembly. I'm Folly Bah Thibault, Senior Presenter for Al-Jazeera English. This is a rare opportunity to be broadcasting from the UN's SDG studio, and we've got a great program for you today. It's called Securing Our Digital Future. And this live stream is produced in partnership between the Complex Risk Analytics Fund, or CRAF'd, and GZERO Media's Global Stage Series sponsored by Microsoft. Over the course of this hour, we're going to talk about the challenges the UN and its 193 member states are confronting this week, where the world stands on critical goals, and how technology, in particular artificial intelligence, can serve as a tool for growth and progress if it truly works for everyone. And we begin today with an impressive gathering of some of the people at the very center of these global discussions. They represent all facets of what's known as a multi-stakeholder approach, bringing governments, multilateral organizations, and the private sector together to solve problems. So joining us today is Brad Smith, Vice Chair and President of Microsoft. Welcome.
Thank you.
Ian Bremer is the founder and president of Eurasia Group and GZERO Media. Thank you for being here, Ian. Also with us, Kristalina Georgieva, who's the managing director of the International Monetary Fund. We are also honored to have with us President Peter Pavel of Czechia. Thank you so much, Mr. President. And Guy Ryder is the UN's Under-Secretary General for Policy. Welcome all. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I know it's a very busy week for all of us. USG Ryder, let me start with you perhaps and look at the big picture. This General Assembly included for the first time the Summit of the Future, a gathering of world leaders tasked with finding a more effective way for global cooperation. You know, at a time of such great conflict, when you look at the Middle East, for example, and polarization, that seems like a huge task, right? So what is the explicit goal, and what do you hope will come out of this week?
I think the explicit goal of the summit that we've just completed, and completed successfully, by the way, 193 countries coming together around a pact for the future, was to better equip the United Nations, a multilateral system, to make international cooperation work better, and to equip it to enable us to construct global responses to the multiple global challenges with which we are faced. I think the realization, not just of our Secretary General, but of citizens around the world, is we really need to do better. We need to do better at preventing and putting an end to conflicts. We need to do better at climate change. We need to do better at delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals. I think we need to do better at making sure finance gets to development goals better. And our summit was aimed at trying to come up with answers to all of those challenges. We have a pact now. I think it's widely considered to be a very valuable document, but I'm one of the first to say it's great, but everything depends on what we do with it from now on.
The Pact for the Future, right?
Correct.
On the question, there is, of course, a debate of the inclusion of the Global South. That's always been like a key issue within the UN system. Specifically, how are you going to address this need for a greater inclusion of the global majority, which is the Global South, in the United Nations approach?
Look, I think we have to look at inclusivity in two ways, and one of the explicit goals was to make multilateralism more inclusive. We had, in the 2 days preceding the summit itself, action days in these premises, 7,000 people from the private sector, from civil society, all types of activism. Extraordinary buzz, extraordinary interest, a wish to be a part of what we're doing, and strong support for what we're doing. That's one element of inclusivity. The other is how it's the terms of inclusion of our member states, because, you know, our governance structures are 80 years old. When the UN was founded, there were 51 founding countries, 193. So I think the thinking is, and the lightning rod of all of this is reform of our Security Council, is we have to make sure that our member states, Global South, Global North, are included on terms which are fair and equitable. And that's been quite a challenge.
Yeah, then reform of the Security Council, of course, has been top of the agenda for the Secretary General. Ms. Georgieva, let me bring into the conversation. Mr. Ryder mentioned there multilateralism, of course. This is also, it seems, a moment of referendum on multilateralism. And when we look at the organizations which were born out, of the post-Second World War era, are the existing frameworks still adequate? Do they still work? How do you view reform through the lens of your work as head of the IMF?
I am very proud to be the head of the IMF at this particular time in history. Why? Because over the last years, the world has been hit by multiple shocks, and the fund stepped up quite decisively. We have injected about $1 trillion in the world economy. 650 billion do not generate debt. These are the special drawing rights we are able to put forward. And symbolically, we see countries expressing their trust in the fund by joining the fund. During the pandemic, we grew from 189 to 190 members. This week, we grew to 191, with the small Principality of Liechtenstein joining the fund. Why is this happening? Because what we deliver is not just the money. What we deliver is to help countries put in place strong policies and capable institutions. And if you think about these last years, you recognize that the world economy has proven to be remarkably resilient. We are growing this year 3.2%, next year 3.2%, and it is because of this foundation that has been built over the decades of strong policies and good institutions. Where you have it, shocks do not crush you. Now, you're asking an important question. Are you completely and totally at ease with where our governance is? And I would answer by saying the world is changing, the fund has to be changing as well.
Right.
We have just added a third chair for Sub-Saharan Africa of our board of directors, because the African continent, 54 countries, of them the least represented because of that large number in the configuration we had before. When I think of the fund of the future, of course I want to see us moving more in the direction of representing the world as it is, not as it used to be.
So a better representation of the world.
Absolutely.
Despite the strong foundation that you talked about.
Because if we want to be respected and legitimate, we have to show that we are not stuck in our glorious past, that we are forward-leaning. So countries can think of us as their family, that it is inclusive and embracing all of our members.
President Pavel, thank you very much. President Pavel, let me bring you into the conversation. You're here this week for the General Assembly, of course. What are some of the challenges that you're looking to highlight, and what do you hope to come out, that will come out of this summit for you?
Well, primarily, what I would like to highlight that we are all together in that situation. We come from different cultures, different parts of the globe with different history, but we will never change history. We can only change present and future. And if we don't want to live forever in conflicts, we have to finally learn that we have to share this planet, and we have to get in compromise in pursuing our interests. No one can live at the expense of the others.
But do you think we're learning that? I mean, how would you describe the state of international cooperation?
We are very bad in learning lessons. But it doesn't mean that we should refrain from trying. So the very sense is in trying the best. And that's why I believe UN is a good platform to present not only the ideals, but also ideas and follow their implementation. Because without it, it will be a great discussion forum, but nothing else. And that's exactly what I'm looking for in this new pact that we agreed on. Because it moves us a little bit ahead, and now it's on us how we will implement all of these good ideas that are involved in this pact.
Yeah, implementation will require cooperation, of course. Let me ask you a follow-up, and this is specifically about one of the geopolitical crises that the world is currently faced with, and that is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We saw following that invasion NATO come together in ways which were not seen arguably since the 9/11 attacks here in the US. Do you, though, still, almost 2 years on since that invasion, do you still see that same level of unity within the organization? And, what is the current threat landscape as you see it?
That would be quite surprising if there is still the same level of unity as it was at the beginning. The beginning was shock as any such a conflict. But once we are getting used to it, we are also getting tired by it. And there is a term, war fatigue, that not only involves directly the war-fighting parties, but also everyone supporting or not supporting. And even here, during the debates, I had an impression that some representatives of the countries are a little bit tired by always hearing that we need to support Ukraine, we need to condemn Russian aggression. Whenever I speak to the nations that are more distant to the conflict, I am trying to explain that it's not the regional conflict that we are talking about, because it involves us almost directly. It's the principles that is that important. We are here in a situation when a permanent member of UN Security Council is leading an aggression against another sovereign country. And that shakes the very foundations of this institution, the system in which we live and in which we want to live, where the rules are respected. And that's why it is so important not to let Russia win in this conflict, because not only Russia, but also similar systems, similar regimes would be encouraged that they can achieve their goals through military power. And that's why it is so important that we don't allow Russia to succeed in this conflict.
Important to respect the rules-based order. Yes, go ahead, please.
You look at the room today, and one thing that you cannot erase from your memory is how very few women were in this room. As long as we have women on the side of power, we would have a hard time to really come together and have fewer wars. So if I want to pick up from your pact that notion that inclusivity matters and translate it into power to the women.
Mr. Ryder, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I think the Secretary General rather bravely said this morning from the platform, when he said we have to do better on gender equity. Gender inequity will be on display in this hall when only, I think, 10% of those who come to the podium will be women. I follow the managing director on that point.
With absolute full respect for the president.
Great, thank you. Listen, so ahead of this live stream, we, GZERO Media, conducted a poll of followers across all social media channels to get their views on some of the issues that we're talking about today. So let's start with a broad one, because we started, of course, a discussion in a broad way. And so GZERO asked the following: which of these global risks concerns you most? Ongoing conflicts, climate change, political polarization, or growing inequality? And here's how people voted. 31% are most concerned about ongoing conflicts, 23% about climate change, 32% about political polarization, and 14% about growing inequality. I imagine that all of you here will say all of the above, right? All right, let me come to you, Ian, first. What's your reaction to this poll? And you've spoken frequently, Ian, about geopolitical recession. Where is that most apparent today, that geopolitical recession? And where do you see realistic opportunities for greater cooperation?
Well, there are a lot of places where we see greater cooperation. We've already talked a bit about it in terms of the Global Digital Compact. It's nice to see that even when polarization is growing to the degree it is, even when geopolitical conflict is growing to the degree it is, we've all been talking about, the fact is the world can still come together and respond constructively to major global challenges. That should not be lost on anyone for why the United Nations exists and why the General Assembly meetings this week have been so constructive and important, number one. But the fact that you have people around the world saying political polarization is my top concern. We all know about climate change. We all know about inequality. They're saying that because they feel like the world and their countries are heading in the wrong direction.
Right.
And they are angry about it, they're lashing out, and it's dehumanizing. They're treating the other as not just a political opponent, but as something much more fundamental, someone that's trying to kind of take away their sense of who they are. And that's why elections all this year, we have seen people come out and they're not just voting left or right, they're voting against whatever you happen to have there.
Right.
Germany, France, the UK, India, South Africa. We'll see what happens in the United
US,
States
right.
in the coming weeks. But this fundamental driver is important. So geopolitical recession, what is that? Well, it's a time when the underlying balance of power is no longer reflects the rules of the road. And you've heard Kristalina talk about this. It's like the world is here, the IMF isn't yet here, and needs to reflect where here is.
Right.
The UN is here, but the world, I mean, it's not just Africa's not as well represented, women aren't as well represented. You look at climate change and what's the global south doing? AI we're going to talk about, where's the global south? The geopolitical recession comes because of that. There are a lot of reasons for it, but I'll focus on three because they're the biggest, and I'll be quick. Reason number one is that Russia, which today is a threat to the principles, core principles of the UN, for the reasons that the President Pavel has said, was not integrated into the West when the Soviet Union collapsed. Whoever you blame, they weren't. There's something else. And they're angry about it. They blame the West, and now you see their principal allies are Iran and North Korea, countries that also threaten the fabric of our rules of the road, number one. Number two, China has been brought in to global architecture very successfully, as Kristalina will tell you, as Guy will tell you. But it was on the presumption that they would eventually become more like the West. And the reality is that China is still authoritarian, is still state capitalist. And many people around the world, especially in Washington, are deeply uncomfortable with that. Third final reason is that while those first two things were going on, many people in the advanced industrial democracies, and especially in our country right here, Brad, mine, the United States, feel like their own leaders forgot about them, don't represent them anymore. They're angry about it, and as a consequence, they don't really know what their country stands for. And those three reasons are why we are presently in a geopolitical recession. I would argue that that is something that is deeply felt by people that are unhappy in various ways around the world.
Yeah, in many countries around the world, people feel that their leaders have failed them, indeed. Ian, Brad mentioned artificial intelligence, and of course we'll talk about that extensively in a few minutes. But I wanted to get your thoughts first on the role of private sector in these increasing crises that we're seeing around the world and that we face in recent years. Why does private sector need to play a more important role, and where do you see the potential for greater impact?
Well, I think almost every big problem that is discussed here at the United Nations this week is a problem that governments are incapable of solving by themselves, which is not to say that the private sector can solve it by itself either. Almost everything today requires that you bring together governments, the private sector, and nonprofit organizations, civil society, and when you bring together the three legs of this stool, you can get a lot more done. I think one of the more interesting things about everything that's happening this week is that the week started on Saturday. It didn't start on Monday the way it usually did. And everybody was brought together for multi-stakeholder conversations. And I loved what the United Nations decided to call it, action days.
Right.
There were 2 days of sort of action days, I would say, when everyone could come together before the companies and nonprofits were sort of assigned to their seats in the audience to watch the government leaders speak, which obviously plays an important role as well. But I think it's really important that people have recognized finally that to get things done, we need to bring more people together to do it.
Yeah, bring more people together. That was really the theme of the action days, wasn't it? So Kristalina Georgieva and President Pavel, many thanks for your contributions today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us here today. In just a moment, we'll be joined by the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Amina Mohammed. First, here's a message from a CRAF'd partner in Norway. Take a look.
My name is Bård Vegar Solhjell and I lead the Norwegian Development Agency. We believe digital public goods are among the most effective things we do. These are things like ID systems, national registers, healthcare system, digital learning materials and so on. I call them the public infrastructure of the future. One example, during COVID, Sri Lanka took its healthcare system, DHIS2, which is open source, and changed it, adapted it into a national COVID treatment system. And within months, more than 50 countries had started using it. This is just one example on how digital public goods create enormous opportunities for development.
Welcome back. We're live from inside UN headquarters in New York during this very busy and important week of the General Assembly. Brad Smith, Ian Bremer, Guy Ryder are still with us. And I have the pleasure of introducing the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Amina Mohammed. Thank you so much for being with us, DSG. So we're going to talk about the SDGs. Yeah, that's what we start with you, right? The 17 Sustainable Development Goals, GSG, they've suffered deep setbacks as the world faces these interlocking crises. And you've said this summer that bold and transformative actions are needed to get the goals on food security, poverty eradication, education back on track. Mm-hmm. So what exactly are these bold and transformative actions that are needed?
Thanks. Well, I think just more focus on where we think investments could actually have these multiplier effects to get all the goals. And that's why we talked about food security, we talked about connectivity, we talked about power, education, but we said think about the climate agenda as well. And then we spoke to the social protection floor that we need because the shocks are coming one after the other. In all of this, how do we actually get it done at the country level? Because we can throw money at the problem, but if we haven't got the capacities and the environment to do it in, then we would have big problems. So we're focusing on the policy and regulatory environments. Often we want to connect power, but we might have the policies, we don't have the regulations and the laws that need to be put in place to protect investments. The second thing we're not doing very well at is we've been designing projects for ODA for decades. We don't design projects that investors will come in at scale to do. And that we have to learn better to do and to make the connections. So if you've got a food security program, how do you make sure that the investments for powering that up at the local level and connecting financial services need to be connected for women. Right. We need to be on e-commerce. We need to have, education for extension work that will come on your handheld. So making the interconnections there, that's design, and design's hard to do when you want to put it all together. The third is that we've talked about how there's a lack of resources, and you've seen from the Pact that we have the international financial architecture. But I think on each investment we speak about, we need to talk about the mix. What is domestic resources? What is coming from outside? And how can we better leverage other essentials for that mix for health systems. Health systems, you can't give charity for health systems. You've got to bring that out of your revenues so that on a day-to-day basis you are providing for the services that need to be given for vaccinations, for maternal health. And then last but not least is the institutions. Institutions are an unattractive expenditure for a leader who's there for 4 years. What they want to see is bricks and mortar. And that doesn't, if you don't get the software, I would say, to this, then it doesn't work. So how do we invest in institutions better to sustain them, but also, I think, to receive these investments and do well by them, that we are actually seeing them with results in people's lives.
Right.
So focus and bold, that's pretty bold. We have to roll up our sleeves, and this is not a short-term fix. This we have to see over time, and we need partners that are going to stay that, road with us.
But are we within the timeline?
Well, look, I'm not going to give up on anyone in the next 6 years. I don't know who you can say that to, that there is no hope. I think what we all have to do is focus on what we can get done by 2030.
Right.
And already today you see in the pact that we've introduced AI and technology and what we can do with guardrails around the potentials of that. So it's not about stopping, it's about really accelerating and getting what we can get done with more partners, with more resources. The international financial architecture hopefully will open up some more cracks, and we just keep chipping away at it. And then when we get to 2030, we'll see if we have another set of goals.
All right. Well, you talked about AI, which leads us perfectly into our next poll question. Another huge focus for this General Assembly are our digital futures and how we can ensure artificial intelligence works for everyone. And so we've got another poll which we asked GZERO followers, and this is what we asked them: which of these is most important to ensure AI benefits society? Regulation and policy, education and training, ethical development, greater digital access and inclusion. And here are the results of the people we put this question to. 56% said regulation and policy, 19% education and training, 18% ethical development, and 7% greater digital access and inclusion. DSG, are you surprised by these answers, first of all?
Yes, I am.
Yes,
I am.
Why?
I thought it would be ethical development, because at the core of this, it's about people and what's going to happen to the fabric of our society. And if we don't have those mindsets, the rest of them, quite frankly, will go in different directions depending who's running them.
I agree with that, by the way.
Okay, go ahead, Ian.
I mean, no, fundamentally, we forget about values. It's so easy to talk about, we need the money, we need the infrastructure. But values tell you where you're going, right? They inform who you are. And we're talking about technologies that have the ability to transform not just the global economy, but society, human beings themselves. So what the fundamental ethics are that inform those decisions, we have to, and that just means we're not doing enough of a job in getting out there and explaining that this is a dialogue that everyone has to have. We need voices from humanity on this.
Right. Brad, your thoughts? I mean, 56% thought that regulation and policy was the most important to ensure that AI benefits society. Your book in 2019 titled Tools and Weapons, you titled that book. And what kind of guardrails need to exist to ensure that these emerging technologies don't widen the equality gap, as we're seeing happen already?
Well, I think it's interesting to think about guardrails and policies in two respects. One is you want to have guardrails and policies to ensure that this technology is used safely, that it's used securely, that it reflects the values that you see on the best days at the United Nations. But the question you asked was, how do you have guardrails that ensure that it reaches everybody? Guardrails are not going to ensure that this reaches everybody. Investment. Well, I mean, just look at electricity. What are the values of the world in the fact that 150 years after it was here in New York, it's still not in Africa? What does that say?
It's a revealed preference.
It shows that you have to, I think about not only the values for AI, but the economics of AI. We need to start with the values, but then move to the economics and ask how we stimulate the investment that's needed to bring it to the world. Values get you started. They are the North Star, but you better figure out the numbers to guide the investment.
Right. Guy Ryder, do you want to weigh in on this? How do we ensure that AI doesn't widen that digital divide that
I
exists?
always have trouble with these polls. I want to tick all of the boxes. And I think all of those boxes are connected.
Yeah.
What is regulation and policy if it's not based on values? You decide what you want to do and you make policies to get there.
Yeah.
What good is a policy if you've got no funds to actually make it a reality? So you connect people, you educate them to use the technologies. So we have to be careful, I think, not to cut this thing up in a way which doesn't keep the coherence of the discussion. Look, I think there's an equity and inequality issue. We've heard a lot in the discussions. We've talked, for as long as I can remember, the digital divide, the lack of connectivity, and it's been a real problem. It truly has in the development process. I think one of the big questions, and I know the high-level advisory board, Ian, you've been much involved in, and others involved in this, are trying to work out how to act so that artificial intelligence doesn't simply compound the existing divides and make them into something even worse.
Right.
And the whole notion of this Global Digital Compact adopted yesterday was to make technology work for everybody, make it work in the broadest, most equitable way for the whole of humanity. And I think if you fall back on that idea, we can find our way forward through these very complex debates. Let's not fool ourselves into thinking they're not complex.
DSG, I'll come back to you with one question before we let you go. I know you have to go soon, but Ian, I wanted to find out more about the recommendations from the UN advisory body you were a member of, and this report, Governing AI for Humanity. What is a key recommendation from that?
I would say two buckets. The first is about deploying artificial intelligence to help us meet the Sustainable Development Goals, right? I mean, we have them. We all agree on what human beings need. They want, access to clean water and a biodiverse, sort of world, and work that's productive and, sort of not being able to go without hunger. We all agree on that.
Right.
We're not hitting them. AI is your opportunity. The use cases that we've already seen from AI in its infancy compared to the investment you're going to see in the next 5 years is the one thing that could allow us to meaningfully turn the needle so that in 2030, Amina can come back and say, we are actually on track. We are making a path that no one expected. So big recommendations here are about capacity building and standard setting and sharing, so that the global south, which has been left out of all of the international efforts at governance until this one, can have a seat at the table. That's the first set. The second recommendation, which sounds a little more abstruse but is actually foundational, is that we're putting together an international scientific panel on AI. What you can't effectively govern AI for the world until the world comes together and agrees what AI is, what it does, what its opportunities are, and what its risks are. And the purpose of that panel is very similar to what climate change the panel did, which is you got the whole world together and said, yeah, we know there are people out there that don't want to talk about climate change, but we know what's happening. So we need a fact-based approach, scientifically, so that everyone knows today, we've got climate change. Here's how much it is. Here are the implications. With AI, it's not a negative thing. With AI, it's about creating a global marketplace, creating opportunities, bringing people in. But to do that, you have to have the scientists in the room with the policymakers, with the private sector, on a real-time basis, not every year, not every 7 years, saying, here is what the state of play of AI is right now, so that everyone in the world, as we deploy the investments, are deploying them intelligently and in a way that's aligned. And those are the principal recommendations that not only came out of this panel, but were actually accepted in the Global Digital Compact by the world governments represented at the General Assembly.
DSG, your thoughts about the opportunities of artificial intelligence, and are you optimistic that we'll see global cooperation on AI, and what would success look like?
Well, I think we're already successful at knowing that global cooperation can happen, but it's hard work. It's just not going to come. It has to be intentional that you get at it, which is what the Secretary General did by putting the panel in place. But I'm just going to say what a friend of mine that I met not so long ago, and he designed the first search engine, and I asked him about it. I said, okay, you're in your 60s now, like me, so what do you think about this AI stuff? And he said, well, look, it's really exciting, it's scary, and we're not ready. And what I think the pact does is begin to scratch the surface of what we need to do to get ready to determine how it can be useful for humanity, and that we can make sure we bring people with us. And that's a whole lot of effort, from investments to actually situating it in whatever circumstance that we see. And remembering, don't put it in a place where you just throw hardware into the mix and say, I need a data center, and then you don't connect what it means to have a data center and the impact of it. So I do believe it's very exciting times, but I think we also have to be accountable and responsible, and this is what the panel did, was to make us aware of the checks and balances that need to go in now.
All right. Thank you very much, DSG. Thank you for joining us. And Undersecretary General Guy Ryder, thank you as well for your time today. We will be back in just a few minutes. As we mentioned, the future is very much at the forefront of conversations this week. And so here's a message on that, about the future, from the UN, and we'll be back after that. Stay with us.
Our choices can make or break the future for generations to come. In just 100 years, humanity has made extraordinary progress. But we've also gone from this to this. This generation has a duty to consider how our choices will impact the 10 billion people who will be born before the end of this century. Using data and foresight tools, we can understand our world more clearly, envision a brighter future, and together make better choices. We can build a thriving, sustainable planet for future generations where everyone has equal rights, poverty and hunger are no more, quality healthcare is accessible, peace prevails, and technology offers opportunities for all. This September, world leaders will gather at the Summit of the Future to decide on a declaration on future generations, recognizing the exponential impact of our actions today for tomorrow, paving the way for our common future.
Welcome back. You're watching Securing Our Digital Future, a special live stream coming to you from inside the United Nations headquarters this evening. This program is produced in partnership between GZERO Media's Global Stage Series and the Complex Risk Analytics Fund. Now, turning now to ways artificial intelligence and data can be a tool to help mitigate risk and promote progress. Brad Smith and Ian Bremer are still with us. Thank you. I'd like to welcome now Anne Witkowski, Assistant U.S. Secretary of State for the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. Also with us, Talal Al-Kaisi, Acting Group Chief Global Affairs Officer of G42, based in Abu Dhabi, and Dr. Workneh Gebeyehu, Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD. Thank you all for being with us. Thank you for joining us. Brad, let me start with you on this one. Let's define first this concept of AI for good. In what ways is the technology already being used to advance on the Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, it's a phrase that is used often, maybe even too often, but I think generally what it refers to is efforts to harness the power of AI to work on specific societal challenges. Often in collaboration with, say, universities or nonprofit, non-governmental organizations, to work on issues like food security or, say, disaster preparedness or disaster response, broader, say, water conservation, biodiversity, sustainability issues. And typically what it involves is the identification of a very specific problem, like, for example, work we've done through our AI for Good Lab to focus on, say, water conservation in Kenya. Collect data, analyze it with the help of AI, and then use that to develop specific recommendations, steps that governments or others can take, and you hope that with that you see a real improvement in a problem that you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
All right, thank you for that. Ann Witkowski, let me bring you into the conversation. You work at the State Department, the U.S. State Department, and you focus on preventing crises and promoting stability, right? So give us some concrete examples of that and explain the role that data plays in this specific effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So data is key to our future. We are using data in our bureau and in the Department of State to change the way we support decision making. We're involved right now, we're engaged in a whole of government innovative initiative to strengthen the way that we partner with nations to build resilience to instability and to conflict through the U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. In that case, high quality and timely data is really key to challenging our assumptions and to giving us a better understanding of what is driving that conflict. It's key to our understanding of what insights we need to make better decisions that would not otherwise be possible. And it helps us coordinate and collaborate, not only within the State Department, within the U.S. government, but with our partners, our bilateral partners across the globe. So taking this integrated approach to more informed decision-making is absolutely critical. We see data as the lens that brings the factors that drive instability into focus.
Right.
And let me give you an example of that, if I might. We are taking data that show us patterns of conflict and violence, and we're integrating it right now into our famine early warning systems network. And by putting those pieces together, we have a much clearer picture of where we see risk for food, high risk for food insecurity.
Okay.
We have a better understanding of the operating context. We can make better decisions about response. We can, we hope, alleviate human suffering and prevent it wherever possible.
And so how do you partner with CRAF'd specifically on that?
Right. So if data is the lens through which we are seeing these factors, these drivers of instability, CRAF'd gives us a better telescope. CRAF'd helps us see across these factors of instability, these drivers related to crisis and conflict. And so we're securing data, for example, on, as I said, patterns of violence, climate-induced migration, gender-related data, and much more. What CRAF'd helps us to do is to integrate that data, to help the data talk to itself, so that from that we can take more integrated and informed decisions looking across these various factors. And we can make, looking upstream, better investments in prevention.
Right.
And maximize our policy impact. So what I would say about CRAF'd is that it has a multiplicity of uses. We heard earlier in this session about the Pact for the Future. I think CRAF'd data can be a source to support nations that have just committed to conflict prevention and peace building in the context of the Pact for the Future. Now, the United States was a founding member of CRAF'd. We are now a co-chair of the CRAF'd steering committee, and I'm really happy to say that we are going to maintain our commitment, our strong commitment to this important initiative through, again, a $2 million commitment this year to the CRAF'd Fund as we support this important piece of work going forward.
Important initiative.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much
Thanks.
for that. Dr. Gebeyehu, let me come to you. Climate action is critical to your organization, IGAD, of course, and to that whole region of East Africa. And same question to you about data. How is it helping, and where do you see the technology bringing progress?
Thank you very much. Yes, I came from the Horn of Africa, which is really have a lot of challenges in spite of the effort that to have accurate data. We still there is a challenge to have inaccurate data. Not only data, I'm talking about accuracy of data. For example, we have one of the devastating drought in the history of the region before 2 years. It is after 14 years. That has affected more than 50 million of the population of the region. Not only that, the conflict in the region also another aspect which is also directly or indirectly related with a scarcity of resources. So number one, we don't have an instrument to accurately to collect data, which are very important instruments to formulate policies, not only policies, but to implement the policy which is formulated. So we have these gaps, which really should be that gap should be bridged. The other point is the sovereignty and as well as the independently collecting the data. Data should be, in empirical sense, data should be who is really independently collect data and disseminate without politicizing or without any kind of thing. So lacking of that kind of data really cost the region in terms of climate change and so on. As IGAD, we have a climate prediction and application center which works for the region, not only for 8 member countries, but also the whole Africa, one of the center of excellence that we have, which we predict the drought, the flood, and the locust swarm, that is happening in the region. So that data, after we collected, we disseminated to the member states and the policy makers or the bureaucrats who are actually using that one can implement and save the lives. But this is not enough in terms of addressing the challenges that we are getting.
Right.
The countries should have their own data system. The countries, not only the countries, in all levels, especially in the lower level because of the applicants should have and consume the data. So the issue of having a capacity to implement and to use data is the problem. Yes, of course, IGAD as an organization, we are supporting our member states. In other words, in conflict, early warning as well.
Right.
We spot the hotspot areas of conflict because of the scarcity of water, because of scarcity of natural resources that potentially leads to the conflict. So data are very important. IGAD, we are doing one aspect of the supporting our member states, but still there's a big gap.
Yeah, a big gap still. Talal, let me bring you into the conversation. Dr. Gebeye, who talked about the lack of tools to collect the data. And so tell us about G42 and what you're doing about that, specifically when it comes to infrastructure and the development of tools to bring the global south in greater participation in the digital economy.
Absolutely. Look, I think one of the words you mentioned, Doctor, is sovereignty. And enablement of sovereignty is something that's becoming much more critical and quite underappreciated. And I think some of the work that we've done recently, at least the successful work we've done in the UAE, is something that we feel is packageable and exportable. And in partnership with Microsoft, what we've built together is the enablement of digital sovereignty on a public cloud backbone like Azure. And that is, in essence, the foundational pillar of what you need to be able to then provide the data analytics that His Excellency spoke about. For us, as an AI and cloud computing company, we're also interested in the full stack. So the data centers you mentioned are important as part of that intelligence grid that we're trying to build out. It's very analogous to a utility, electricity. People are going to plug in and be able to interact with intelligence. And for the first time in human history, you have an intelligence form factor that is on par with the human collective and potentially will supersede it. And that is a force multiplier to human ingenuity. And for us, it's important to democratize access to advanced technologies like that and deploy it in a way that's responsible and do it in partnership with like-minded companies, countries, and partners. So it's a very important component to the overall stack that we're building, so that the solutions that are built on top of them, what we do in the healthcare space with the genomic program that we have at G42, what we do with geospatial analytics to do, preparedness for disasters or, understanding weather patterns. We announced something recently with NVIDIA in terms of a climate tech lab that's being deployed in the UAE using their digital twin. These are the types of things that we want to try to bring to other countries in the world as well.
Yeah. Brad, do you want to add, because obviously Microsoft and G42 are working together in the Global South to set up these data centers. What are your thoughts about what Talal just said there?
Well, I do think that what we have the opportunity to do together, and what all of us really have the opportunity to do together, is, I'll say, create common, strong global standards, for safety, for security, for trust and trustworthy AI. And you look at a lot of the intergovernmental work, and even this UN high-level advisory board, and it's really created a foundation. You then need the investment in the technology. And think about this technology stack as maybe being simplified to 3 layers. You need the infrastructure layer, the digital infrastructure. You need these advances in AI models. You need the science and data to understand the capabilities that those models are providing. And then what you really need to do is enable people to build applications. Right. It's what we call the applications layer. That's where schools get to work, or that's where a company gets to work. It's where people create something that harnesses the power of AI to do better whatever it is that they're trying to do. And of course, if it's really going to actually help reduce the divides of the world, it's got to be made available everywhere in a way that respects sovereignty and also these global security, safety, and other standards. That's what we're sort of nudging the world to do. It's what the White House and the U.S. government are doing. It's what the UN and other agencies are doing. And I think if we can keep on that path, it gives us some real hope.
All right, there is hope. Right, so we are almost coming to the end of the program, but before I get your final thoughts, I want to show you the final poll that we asked the GZERO followers to take, and this one is on the opportunities AI presents society. So GZERO asked, what do you see as AI's biggest opportunity? Revolutionizing healthcare, advancing education, enhancing productivity, creating new job sectors. And these are the results. 41% think it's revolutionizing healthcare, 9% advancing education, which is a bit surprising, but 43% enhancing productivity, and 7% creating new job sectors. Your thoughts about these poll results, and also perhaps a final word. Let me come to you first, Ian, I guess.
Well, Guy before also said it well. You could tick all these boxes. I'd be an all of the above kind of guy here. I think for me, this is not about robots taking over. This is not about artificial general intelligence, but it is about a tool that will allow human beings to invent things that humans otherwise could not have invented in every sector that we need to reduce waste, to improve efficiency and productivity, but also to do things that right now we can't conceive of. And we've had so many tools that we've created over the course of humanity that have helped make us more productive at things we know how to do.
Right.
These are tools that are going to allow us to do things we don't know how to do. And that the question is whether we will use them for humanity.
Right.
Will we use them for good? Or we use them for, sort of just spinning our wheels, or God forbid, destroying the planet. This is an opportunity we've never been afforded before. And the reason we need, investment and common governance and principles is so we can deploy them in ways that we all can align.
But are you confident that the geopolitical environment, the current geopolitical environment, will allow this opportunity that you talk about to be distributed equally?
No. No, of course I'm not
confident.
confident.
And how do we do that?
I'm not confident at all, because most of the geopolitical challenges in the world are heading in exactly the opposite direction. When you talk about climate change, you have a demand by poorer countries saying you've taken advantage, and at the expense of your children, and at the expense of these poorer countries, and you need to take care of us. For AI, we have an opportunity to do it better. Right? right is hard to say. Right is 100%. We're not black or white here. But in terms of can we do it better than we've done with climate change? The answer is yes. And the answer is yes because every one of these steps that we're calling for at the United Nations are steps that will create more opportunities. Not just more opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa, more opportunities for everyone to work together. We have human capital that is untapped, unleveraged, left out. And if and AI is your collective opportunity, our last shot at this. It's our last shot at this, right? It's an amazing shot. It's our biggest shot on goal, but it's our last shot.
All right.
So we better get it right.
All right, Talal, your final thoughts. How do we get it right?
I agree with Ian, all of the above and some. I believe things like healthcare, when you start seeing improved medical outcomes as a result of deploying AI, I believe that's when people will start understanding the immense power that can come with doing so in a responsible way. When you look at genomics, you cannot scratch the surface without the tools that are necessary from a digital infrastructure standpoint for preventative care, precision medicine, or drug discovery. And so these are the things where you start to see the value of how it's not only saving lives, but preventing people from getting sick in the first place by early detection and the like. So I think that's an extremely powerful message.
All right. Anne Witowski, your final thoughts, the opportunities of artificial intelligence and the challenges that lie ahead as well.
Yeah, clearly the opportunities are to give us a clearer picture of what it is we need to know, how it is we need to know it, and then to unpack the challenges so that we understand how to make better decisions about responses to those challenges. And not only, as we've been talking here, to do it on our own as nations, but to do it collectively, collectively among governments, and with the benefit of data that can be more accessible to all.
Thank you. Dr. Gebeyehu, your final thoughts about this.
Thank you very much. So we are talking about securing our future. Securing our future, definitely the role of artificial intelligence is very important, and also we are seeing some of the products. But what worries me is the magnitude of having collective governance on this artificial intelligence. How can we really regulate some of the things that we cannot control? Are we going to the chartered territory or unchartered territory? That's more of that. So having a regulation, a regulatory body internationally or whatever, that will help us, especially the countries which are suffering in climate change and drought and conflicts. Some of the things may be used against the will of the people or against or to exacerbate some of the challenges that we are already having. So it needs regulation and governance.
All right, Brad, I'll give you the final word. Dr. Gebeyehu is concerned about regulation. How do we address that?
Well, I think you've got to get a healthy balance. If you have too little, then I think people will lose confidence in the safety of these products. If you have too much, you slow innovation. What I would leave one with is something very thought-provoking, I think, in that survey result. 4 times as many people think that AI will change healthcare as change education. And that's probably right for a pretty simple reason. Think about upstream, the examples you used. AI can change drug discovery, make possible precision medicine. And when you do that upstream, it just almost flows naturally to all of the doctors who are making use of it. Education always moves more slowly. Even if you have great tools, you've got to get teachers and students and parents and families all comfortable with education changing. And I think the great lesson here is that people start by asking what technology can and will do. But ultimately, when it comes to the use of technology, people decide.
Exactly.
And you've got to take everyone along together on the same journey. Only by doing that do you ensure that the technology advances serve people.
All right, so people decide and not the technology. We'll leave it with that. Thank you so much for a great, great conversation. Thank you, Brad Smith, Ian Bremer, Anne Witowski, and Talal Al-Kaisi, and Dr. Wakni Gebeyehu for being with us today and for your great insights into these crucial issues. Thank you for sharing your insights, and thank you once again to all of the guests who joined us during this program live from the United Nations on UN General Assembly Week. On behalf of our hosts from the Complex Risk Analytics Fund and our media partners at GZERO and the Global Stage Series, thank you very much for watching. You can follow all of GZERO's coverage of the 79th UN General Assembly by visiting gzeromedia.com and across all of GZERO's social channels. I'm Folly Bah Thibault, wishing you a great evening. Thank you for watching.